Hi, and welcome to One Verse, where we explain the Bible one verse at a time. And I believe it's one verse that can make all the difference. And today we're going to be looking at Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Now, this is a very powerful passage, one of my favorite by far. Now, Paul is writing here to the Galatian church, and if you want a little bit of context, the Galatian church is in Turkey, which would be Asia Minor. So what he is writing here is that the church really had forgotten its identity. It had forgotten what the gospel is. And that is what this verse is all about. This verse is all about identifying with Christ. So when Paul says, when he sees the crucifixion of Christ, he says, not only was Christ crucified, but I was crucified with Christ. This is an identity switch. It's taking the cross and no longer seeing the cross as our example, but seeing the cross where we identify. And this is what's really important for Christians today, as it was for the church in Galatia, that we must see the cross not only as an example, but where we identify. So Paul is saying, he's like, I no longer live, I was crucified with Christ. So what does he mean by that? Well, if you know a little bit about Paul's life, Paul stood by and watched Christians be murdered. If you look in the book of Acts, Stephen who got stoned, Paul is standing there. Paul is there approving of his death. And on his way to Damascus, that's where Christ showed up. And what is powerful is that even while Paul is standing by the murder of Stephen, Christ loved Paul. And Paul is saying at the end of this verse, he says, I placed my faith in the Son of God. Why? Because he loved me and gave himself up for me. This is powerful for Paul. For Paul, he's like, I hated the church. Paul's like, I had hatred, I had self-righteousness, I had anger. And that's why he says when he sees the cross, that's where my pride, self-righteousness, and anger and hatred, that's where it all died. And the new life, the life I live in Christ, is a life of love, mercy, forgiveness, and grace. And this is true for us as believers as well, that when we see the cross of Christ, we see the cross as not merely our example, but the cross is where we identify. It's where our old life of sin died. Our life of pride, greed, lust, anger, hatred, self-righteousness. That pride is gone. That sin is gone on the cross. So not only do we identify with his death, we identify with his life. And this is why Easter is so important for the Christian. And this is also why we cannot await for the return of Christ. So when you see a cross, don't just see where Jesus died. Say, that is where I died. And that is where my sins reside. But now I am a new person. I am alive and new in Christ. I pray and hope that this video is an encouragement for you to strengthen and encourage your faith in Jesus Christ.